The first thing I saw that morning was my husband's name on my phone. 38 missed calls. I stared at the screen from the passenger seat of my mother's rental car, my coffee untouched in the cup holder. 38 calls in less than 12 hours from the same man who the night before had looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Absolutely not. Your mom isn't my responsibility. Figure it out." I didn't call him back. Not yet. Because 24 hours earlier, I had still believed I was married to a man who understood what family meant. My name is Emily Carter, and at 34 I was an Army captain stationed at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. My life was built around schedules, responsibility, and keeping my word. After years of service, I had learned to stay calm when other people panicked. But nothing prepared me for the night. My 81-year-old mother called me from an airport bench and quietly said, "Honey, I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight." Her flight had been canceled because of severe thunderstorms moving across the southeast. She had been trying to get home after visiting an old friend in Florida. The airline had put her on standby for the next afternoon, but every affordable hotel near the airport was either full or charging prices that made no sense for one night. My mother hated asking for help. She was the kind of woman who would carry a grocery bag with a broken handle all the way home, rather than admit she needed another one. Even at 81, she insisted on doing things herself. So, when she called me, I knew she was scared. "Mom, stay where you are," I said. "I'll figure it out. I don't want to bother you. You're not bothering me." I was already reaching for my keys. Our house was less than an hour from the airport. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I would pick her up, bring her home, make her something warm to eat, and let her sleep in our guest room. The next morning, I would drive her back to the airport. One night. That was all. On the drive, I called my husband, David. He answered after 3 rings. "Hey," he said. "What's up? Mom's flight was canceled. She's stranded at the airport. I'm going to pick her up." There was a pause. Then he said, "Okay, I was thinking she could stay with us tonight. Just tonight. I'll take her back to the airport in the morning." Another pause. This one felt different. "No." I almost laughed because I thought I had misunderstood him. What I said, "No, David, it's one night. I know. She's 81. I know how old she is, Emily." His voice was flat. There was no concern about the weather, no question about whether she was safe, no hesitation, just irritation. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "She has nowhere to go. That's not my problem." I pulled into a gas station and parked. "Excuse me." He sighed. "Your mom isn't my responsibility. If she needs somewhere to stay, figure it out." For several seconds I couldn't speak. I thought about the guest room upstairs, the clean sheets, the extra blankets in the hall closet, the fact that my mother had never once asked David for money or special treatment. "David," I said quietly, "I'm not asking you to take care of her. I'm asking if an 81-year-old woman can sleep in our guest room for one night." "Absolutely not." Something inside me went very still. I could have argued. I could have reminded him that when his mother needed help last winter, I drove 2 hours after a 12-hour duty day to take her to an appointment. I could have reminded him that I had helped pay for repairs at his mother's house, without ever asking whose responsibility it was. But I didn't. I simply said, "Okay." He seemed almost surprised by how quickly I gave in. "Good," he said. "I've got work early tomorrow." Then he hung up. I sat there for another minute. They moved around me. A truck rumbled past. Someone was filling a car at the next pump. Everything looked ordinary. But my marriage suddenly didn't. I drove to the airport and found my mother sitting beside 2 suitcases wearing a cardigan over her blouse. She looked exhausted. When she saw me, she smiled. "You came." "Of course I came." She studied my face. "Did David mind?" I forced a small smile. "He's tired, it's fine." I didn't tell her what he had said. I didn't want her carrying the weight of his rejection on top of everything else. At the hotel, I paid for the room, carried her bags upstairs, and made sure she had water and her medication beside the bed. She touched my hand. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "For what?" "For causing trouble." I sat beside her. "Mom, you are not trouble." Her eyes filled with tears. I hugged her. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was angry, because I was thinking about every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I had defended David. Every time I had told myself that marriage meant making sacrifices. By morning, I understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. Sacrifice was not the problem. One-sided sacrifice was. At 7:12 a.m., my phone began vibrating. David. I ignored it. It rang again and again. By the time I looked at the screen, there were 38 missed calls. Then a text appeared. Emily, please call me. I need you. I read it twice. The woman who had spent the night making sure her 81-year-old mother had a safe place to sleep suddenly felt very calm. Because whatever had happened at home, David was no longer calling to tell me my mother wasn't his responsibility. He was calling because he needed something from me. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I was going to give it to him. I let the phone ring one more time before answering. Hello? David didn't say hello. Emily, where are you? I looked through the hotel window at the parking lot below. My mother was sitting at the small table near the window, slowly stirring sugar into her coffee. I'm with Mom, I know that. I mean, where exactly? Why? He exhaled sharply. Because I need you to come home. I almost smiled. Last night he had made it very clear that my mother had no place in our home. Now he wanted me there. What happened? My mom has a problem. I sat back in my chair. Linda? Yes. What kind of problem? There's water everywhere. A pipe burst overnight. The downstairs ceiling is damaged, and the plumber says they have to shut everything off. I glanced at my mother. She had stopped stirring. Is your mom okay? She's fine. She's staying with a neighbor right now. That's good. I need her to stay with us. I said nothing. David continued. Just for a few days, maybe a week. Until the repairs are finished. I stared at the phone. There was something almost surreal about hearing those words. A few hours earlier, he had told me my mother wasn't his responsibility. Now his 80-year-old mother needed our guest room. David, I said carefully, didn't you tell me yesterday that my mom wasn't your responsibility? Silence. Then this is different. How? My mom has nowhere to go. So did mine. That's not fair. I felt something tighten in my chest. Fair? Yes, you're twisting my words. I'm not twisting anything. I'm repeating what you said. He became defensive. I was stressed yesterday. So was Mom. She was at a hotel because you told me she couldn't stay at our house. That doesn't mean I don't care about her. I looked down at my hands. I had spent most of my adult life learning how to stay composed under pressure. In the army, you couldn't afford to let anger make decisions for you. So, I asked the question that mattered. If Linda needs a place to stay, how long do you think she'll need it? I don't know. A few days. Okay. His voice immediately softened. Thank you. But I need to understand something first. What are you asking me to agree because you think we're partners or because you expect me to solve this? He didn't answer. I waited. Finally, he said, Emily, I just need you to help. I closed my eyes. There it was. The word I had heard throughout our marriage, help. I had helped with his mother. I had helped with his debts. I had helped when his car broke down. I had helped when he changed jobs. I had helped when my military schedule became difficult and still found a way to keep our household running. But whenever I needed something from him, there was always a reason it was inconvenient. Where is Linda now? I asked. At the Hampton Inn, near her house. Then she's safe, for now. Then let's take this one step at a time. David became impatient. I don't have time for this, Emily. I almost laughed. You called me 38 times because you weren't answering. I was asleep. No, you weren't. I looked toward my mother. She gave me a questioning expression. I lowered my voice. David, what exactly do you need from me? I need you to come home and help me figure out what we're going to do. What does that mean? It means I need my wife. The words landed strangely. My wife. Last night I had been his wife when he told me to figure out my mother's problem alone. This morning suddenly being his wife meant something different. I looked at my mother. She had heard enough to understand. She quietly mouthed, "Don't fight." I nodded. Then I said to David, "I'll come home after I take Mom to the airport." He sighed with relief. Okay. But Linda isn't moving into our house until we talk. What? I said we talk first. Emily, this is my mother, I know. And she's 80 years old, I know. So was my mother last night. He went quiet. I could hear his breathing through the phone. Then he said, "You're punishing me." No, you are. David, I'm not punishing you. I'm asking you to think about what happened. I already said I was stressed. And I heard you. I said I'm sorry. You haven't said that. Another silence. Then very quietly he said, "Fine, I'm sorry. I knew immediately that he didn't mean it, not yet. He was saying it because he wanted the problem solved. Still, I didn't argue. I'll see you this afternoon. When I ended the call, my mother looked at me. You don't have to go home because he wants you to. I know. Then why are you going? I thought about it. Because I need to understand what's really happening. My mother studied me for a moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Your husband sounded frightened. He is. Why? I don't know. She took a sip of coffee. Then find out before you decide what to do. Those words stayed with me. After taking Mom to the airport, I drove home. The house looked exactly as I had left it. Same porch, same flower pot beside the front door, same photograph of David and me from our wedding sitting on the entry table. But when I walked inside, everything felt unfamiliar. David was waiting in the kitchen. He looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. Where have you been with Mom? I know. I put my keys on the counter. How bad is the damage at Linda's? He hesitated. Bad. How bad I don't know yet. Who is paying for it? Another pause. Insurance probably. Probably. He looked away, and that was when I noticed something. A stack of unopened envelopes sat beside the coffee maker. Bills, several of them. I recognized the logo of one credit card company, then another, then a personal loan statement. I looked at David. He followed my eyes. Those aren't important. Then why are they here? They came this week. How much do you owe? He frowned. That's none of your business. The words hit harder than I expected. I stared at him. My husband's debt isn't my business? He rubbed his forehead. That's not what I meant. But I knew it was, or at least it was what he had been treating it as. I walked over to the counter and picked up one of the envelopes. He quickly took it from my hand. Emily, what? I can handle it. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I remembered the 38 calls. I remembered his panic. I remembered his mother's flooded house. And suddenly, the pieces were beginning to fit together. This wasn't just about where Linda would sleep. Something else was wrong. Something much bigger. And I had a feeling David had been hoping I would never ask the right question. That evening I realized the problem wasn't Linda's flooded house. It wasn't even the stack of unpaid bills sitting beside our coffee maker. The real problem was that my husband had been living a second life financially, and I had been the last person to know about it. David spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince me everything was manageable. It's temporary, he said. We were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. How temporary? A few months? How much debt? He looked at the floor. I don't know exactly, David. He rubbed both hands over his face. About $48,000. I stared at him. $48,000? Maybe a little more. My stomach tightened. Credit cards? Some. Personal loans? Yes. Anything else? He didn't answer. That silence told me there was more. I leaned back in my chair. How long have you known it's complicated? No, it isn't. He looked at me. You've been hiding almost $50,000 of debt from me. I was trying to fix it before you found out. Why? Because I knew you'd worry. I almost laughed. You didn't want me to worry. No, you wanted me not to know. He looked away. There was a difference, a very important one. I had spent years in the military learning that problems rarely became smaller because someone hid them. They became more dangerous. What did you spend it on? David's jaw tightened. Things. What things? Living expenses. Some repairs? A few bad decisions? A few. He didn't answer. I thought about our household budget. The mortgage was current. Utilities were current. Our insurance was current. I had always assumed David was managing his side of the finances responsibly. Then another thought came to me. Have you been using money from our joint account to make those payments? He looked at me. Only 4, but that was enough. My heart sank. How much? I put some money back. How much, Emily, please? How much? He finally admitted it. About 12,000. I pushed my chair away from the table. For a moment I couldn't speak. Not because $12,000 was going to ruin me. It wasn't. My military career had given me financial stability, and I had always been careful with money. What hurt was the betrayal. He had taken money from our shared household without telling me, while telling me that my mother's emergency wasn't his responsibility. I stood. Where are you going? To look at our accounts. You don't trust me. I turned around. Do you? He looked confused. What? Do you trust me? Of course. Then why did you hide this? He had no answer. That night I sat at the dining room table with my laptop open. I downloaded statements, credit card statements, bank statements, loan records. I went through every transaction carefully. At first I expected to find only debt. Instead I found something much more painful. For almost a year, David had been spending hundreds of dollars a month on things he had never discussed with me. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, online purchases, a new television, concert tickets, a private golf membership. None of those things were wrong by themselves. But together, they told a story. David had been spending as if we had more money than we did. And when the bills came due, he had quietly relied on my income to keep everything afloat. I kept scrolling. Then I found a payment to an account I didn't recognize. I wrote down the name. The next morning, I called the bank. It was a personal line of credit in David's name, but the address attached to it was ours. I sat there staring at the screen. When David came home from work, I asked him about it. "What is this?" He froze. "Where did you see that on our financial records?" "You went through my accounts." I went through our accounts. He pulled out a chair. "Emily, I was going to tell you when I got it under control. You've been saying that for a year." He looked embarrassed, then angry. "You don't understand what it's like." I stared at him. "What it's like?" "To feel like you're always behind." I softened slightly. "I would have helped you." "No, you would have judged me." "I've never judged you for struggling." "You would have. Then you should have given me the chance to prove you wrong." He went quiet. I sat down again. "I need you to tell me everything." He hesitated. Then he finally admitted the part he had been avoiding. He had taken out the personal loan because he had fallen behind on several credit cards. He had used part of it to cover payments, creating a cycle where one debt was paying another, and now he was close to the limit. "That's why you called me 38 times, I said. He looked at me. "I called because I was scared. Because of Linda, partly." "What does that mean?" He swallowed. "The insurance deductible for her house is more than I expected." "How much?" $8,000. I closed my eyes. There it was. The reason. He wasn't simply worried about where his mother would stay. He needed money, my money. And suddenly his refusal the night before looked different. Maybe he had been angry because he knew he might need me the next morning. Maybe he had convinced himself that my family was my responsibility because he wanted his family to remain his priority. Either way, something had become painfully clear. He expected my resources to be available when his family needed them, but my mother was somehow an inconvenience. I looked at him. "Did you ever plan to tell me about the debt?" "Yes." "When?" "I don't know." I nodded slowly. Then I said that the words that frightened him more than any argument could have. "I'm separating our finances." His face changed. "What? You heard me. You're going to punish me because I made mistakes." "No," I closed the laptop. "I'm stopping you from making your mistake as my responsibility." He stood. "Emily, we're married." "Yes." "So, what's mine is yours." I looked directly at him. "Then why wasn't my mother yours when she needed one night?" He said nothing. The kitchen became completely silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten divorce. I didn't insult him. I simply began moving my money into an account only I could access and contacted a financial counselor through a military family support program. That was the moment my revenge truly began, not because I wanted to hurt David, because I was finally removing the one thing he had counted on without realizing it, my unconditional rescue. And there was one more thing I needed to know. The next morning, I found an email on our shared computer. It was from David to his brother. The subject line read, "Don't worry, Emily won't leave." I opened it, and after reading the first few sentences, I understood just how badly my husband had misunderstood me. I read the email 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I couldn't believe how certain David sounded. He had written to his brother about his debts, the repairs at Linda's house, and the possibility that I might finally become angry. Then came the sentence that stayed with me. "Don't worry, Emily won't leave. She'd never do that to me." I closed the laptop. For years I had thought loyalty was one of my strengths. That morning I realized David had mistaken it for a weakness. I didn't confront him immediately. I had learned something during my years in uniform. When emotions are high, don't make decisions simply because someone expects an immediate response. So I made coffee. I took a shower. I put on my uniform. and I went to work. For the first time in a long time, I spent an entire morning thinking about something other than how to keep my marriage comfortable. At lunch, I called the financial counselor available through the military installation. I explained the situation without exaggerating anything. She listened. Then she asked me a question. Are you trying to save your marriage? I hesitated. Yes. Then the first thing you need to save is yourself. I wrote that down, not because it sounded dramatic, because it made sense. That afternoon I returned home. David was sitting at the kitchen table. He looked nervous. You've been avoiding me. I've been working. You saw the email. I stopped. So you know. I know. He looked down. I was frustrated. You told your brother I wouldn't leave. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? He couldn't answer. I put my bag down. You've spent months making decisions because you believed I'd always clean up the consequences. That's not fair, isn't it? He stood. I was scared. So was my mother. His face tightened. I already apologized for that. No, David. You apologized because you needed something from me. He shook his head. That isn't true. Then tell me what you were thinking when you told me my 81-year-old mother wasn't your responsibility. He stared at the floor. I was angry. At her? No. At me. He nodded. Why? He took a long breath. Because everything seems easier for you. I almost laughed. Easier? You have your career, you have your benefits, you're disciplined, you always know what to do. I stared at him. You think my life is easy? No. You've watched me leave before sunrise for years, I know. You've watched me miss birthdays, holidays, family dinners, and weekends because of duty, I know. You've seen me come home exhausted and still make sure the bills were paid. I know. Then why are you competing with me instead of standing beside me? His eyes filled with tears. I don't know. That was the first honest answer he had given me in days. I sat down. He sat across from me. For the first time, the anger between us gave way to something more complicated. Pain. David told me he had started feeling inadequate years earlier. Every time I received a promotion, he felt proud for about 5 minutes, then insecure. Every time someone thanked me for my service, he wondered why nobody thanked him. Every time I handled a crisis calmly, he felt like he was failing. Instead of admitting those feelings, he became resentful. And resentment left alone long enough turned into cruelty. I thought if I made you feel like you weren't needed, he said, I'd feel less useless. I looked at him. That is one of the saddest things you've ever said to me. I know. But it doesn't excuse what you did. I know. And it doesn't excuse what you said about Mom. I know. Silence settled over the room, then he asked, What happens now? I looked at him. Now we stop pretending. I opened a folder and placed it on the table. Inside were the financial statements, the debt totals, and the information from the counselor. I've separated my personal finances from yours. His eyes widened. You did what I protected my accounts. You don't trust me. Not with money right now. He looked hurt. I'm your husband and you're responsible for rebuilding that trust. He pushed the folder away. You're punishing me. No. I kept my voice calm. I'm allowing you to experience the consequences of decisions you made without me. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, What about Mom Linda? Yes, she's still your mother. I know. She needs a place to stay. He nodded. And you're going to help her. Will you help? I thought about it. Then I said, yes. His eyebrows lifted. Really, yes, but not the way we used to. What does that mean? It means we make a plan. We find out what insurance covers. We talk to the contractor. We look at temporary housing. We don't put everything on a credit card and pretend the problem disappeared. He nodded slowly. And the money? I won't give you money to hide the problem. He swallowed. But if there's a legitimate emergency, we handle it together transparently. For the first time, David seemed to understand the difference. I wasn't abandoning him. I was refusing to enable him. That evening we visited Linda. Her house was a mess. Fans were running to dry the floors. Furniture had been moved into the garage, and the smell of wet drywall filled the air. Linda looked embarrassed when she saw me. Emily, I'm so sorry. You don't have to apologize. She glanced at David. He told me what happened. I looked at her. Mom, this isn't your fault. She reached for my hand. I know what he said about your mother. I froze. David looked uncomfortable. Linda continued. I told him he was wrong. David looked down. She told me that he said quietly. Linda squeezed my hand. Your mother is family. Those words nearly broke me because they were exactly what I had wanted to hear from my husband. Not because my mother needed to be his responsibility, but because compassion shouldn't require a legal obligation. When we left Linda's house, David walked beside me in silence. Finally, he said, "Are you leaving me?" I stopped. "I haven't decided." His face fell. "I love you, I believe you. Then why doesn't that feel like enough?" "Because love without respect eventually becomes another kind of loneliness." He looked away. I touched his arm. "If you want this marriage, David, I need to see change." "What kind? Real change?" He nodded. "I'll do it." I looked at him. "For once, don't promise me." "Then what? Show me." That night, I returned home alone. My mother called before I went to bed. She asked how things were. I told her the truth. "We're not fixed." She was quiet. Then she said, "Good." I smiled. "Good. Sometimes you shouldn't fix something until you understand why it broke." I lay back against my pillow. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, not revenge, hope. But the next morning, my mother called again. Her voice sounded different, more serious. "Emily," she said, "there's something I should have told you about David." I sat upright. "What?" She took a breath. "I knew something was wrong long before you did." I sat upright in bed. "What do you mean you knew something was wrong?" My mother was quiet for several seconds. "I didn't know about the debt," she finally said. "Not specifically. But I knew David was unhappy." I looked toward the window. Morning light was beginning to spread across the bedroom wall. How long? Almost a year. I felt my chest tighten. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to become the reason you questioned your marriage." I closed my eyes. She continued softly. "I've watched you your whole life, Emily. I know how seriously you take your commitments. Once you decide someone is your family, you will walk through fire for them." I smiled sadly. "That sounds like a compliment." "It is, but sometimes a good quality can hurt you when you don't know where to draw the line." I sat there silently. Then Mom said something I hadn't expected. "David wasn't always like this." "I know. No, I mean it. I remember when he was different." I thought back. She was right. When David and I first married, he had been thoughtful with her. He remembered her birthday. He brought her favorite coffee when we visited. Once, when her car wouldn't start during a winter storm, he drove nearly an hour to pick her up. I remembered standing in the doorway that night, watching him come inside, covered in snow. He had laughed and said, "Your mom needs a rescue mission." Mom had always loved telling that story. "He cared about me," she said. "He did." That's why I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I swallowed. "What were you seeing?" He became irritated whenever you talked about helping me." That surprised me. "I never noticed." "I did." She paused. "He would smile when you were around, but afterward, when you weren't looking, he would sigh." I thought about all the times I'd been busy with work and assumed his silence meant exhaustion. Mom continued. "Once I told him I could pay you back for the money you spent helping me with the roof." "What did he say?" He said, "That's not necessary." I frowned. That doesn't sound bad." He said it politely. I understood. Mom knew the difference between polite words and a cold heart. Then he told me, "You already had enough responsibilities." I stared at the wall. My mother had carried that sentence alone for months. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd confront him. And then he would know I had been talking about him." I sighed. "Mom, you were protecting me." "I was trying to." She took another breath. "But I don't want to protect you from the truth anymore." That sentence stayed with me. For years, I had thought protecting someone meant keeping painful information away from them. Maybe sometimes protection meant helping them see clearly. That afternoon, I asked David to meet me at a quiet diner near the base. He arrived early. He looked tired. When he saw me, he stood. Hey. We sat across from each other. I didn't order anything. "Mom told me she knew you were unhappy." David's expression changed. "She told you?" "Yes." He looked down. "I didn't want her involved." "She was involved because you made her part of our marriage when you told me my mother wasn't your responsibility." He nodded. "I know." I studied him. "Were you angry at Mom?" "No." "At my mother?" "No." "At me?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" He gave a bitter little laugh. "Because I was ashamed." "Of what?" "Of feeling jealous of your life." I didn't interrupt. He continued. "You served your country. People respected you. You had discipline. You had a purpose. and I felt like I was just standing next to you. You could have told me. I know, I would have listened, I know. You could have gone to counseling. I know. You could have said you were struggling. I know. His eyes filled. Instead, I started making you smaller in my head. I felt tears building behind my own eyes. What does that mean? I told myself you were too independent, too focused on your family, too involved with your career. He looked at me. Anything was easier than admitting I was insecure. I sat quietly. There it was. The ugly truth underneath all the arguments. His behavior wasn't justified. But now I understood it. Understanding someone doesn't mean excusing them. That's something I had learned the hard way. I need you to understand something, I said. He nodded. My mother isn't competing with you. I know. My military career isn't competing with you. I know. And my independence isn't an insult to you. I know. If you ever feel that way again, you tell me. You don't punish me for it. I won't. You can't promise that. He looked at me. Then I'll prove it. For the first time, I believed he might, not completely, but enough to leave the door open. We finished our coffee and walked outside. The afternoon was warm, and the parking lot shimmered under the sun. Before we reached the car, David stopped. I want to apologize to your mom. I looked at him. Why? Why? Because she didn't deserve what I said. She didn't, and I want to apologize to you. I waited. He took a breath. When your mother called that night, you were trying to help an 81-year-old woman who was stranded after a canceled flight. You asked me for one night. He looked down, and I made you feel like you were asking for something unreasonable. I said nothing. I was cruel, yes, I was selfish, yes, and when my mother needed help the next day I expected you to forget everything, yes. He nodded. I understand why you didn't. That was the first apology that didn't make me angry, because he wasn't asking me to comfort him. He wasn't saying I'm sorry you felt hurt. He was saying I was wrong. That mattered. Still, forgiveness wasn't automatic. Trust wasn't automatic. A marriage couldn't be repaired by one conversation in a diner. So, I told him exactly that. I forgive you for what you said. He looked relieved. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I understand. We still need financial counseling. Yes. We need separate accounts for personal spending. Yes. And if either of us is struggling, we talk before making financial decisions. Yes. And my mother will always be welcome in my life. He smiled faintly. She should be. I studied his face. Do you mean that? I do. A week later, David came to my mother's house. He brought flowers. Mom opened the door. She looked at him for a long moment. Can I come in? He asked. She stepped aside. He entered. Then he stood in front of her and said something I will never forget. Margaret, I was wrong. Mom didn't immediately respond. David continued. You needed help, and I made you feel unwanted. You didn't deserve that. Mom looked at him. Then she said, No, I didn't. I know. She eventually hugged him. It wasn't a movie-style embrace. There were no tears or dramatic speeches. Just two people standing in a quiet living room, choosing to take one small step toward something better. Later that evening, Mom called me into the kitchen. You love him, she said. I nodded. I do. And I love myself too. She smiled. Good. That was the lesson I had needed to learn. Marriage wasn't supposed to require me to disappear. Loyalty wasn't supposed to mean tolerating disrespect. And boundaries weren't punishments. They were instructions for how people were allowed to treat you. David and I still had work to do, but for the first time, we were doing it honestly. Then one evening, several months later, I found myself standing in our kitchen with my mother beside me. David walked through the front door carrying 2 grocery bags. He looked at Mom and smiled. I got the coffee you like. Mom laughed. You remembered, of course. I watched them, and I realized something had changed. Not because David had become perfect, but because he had finally stopped expecting love to mean being rescued. He had learned to stand beside me instead. And strangely enough, the greatest revenge I could have taken on the man who once told me to figure it out wasn't destroying his life. It was refusing to let his worst moment become the definition of our entire marriage. 6 months after the night, my mother was stranded at the airport. I was sitting at our kitchen table when my phone showed an old photograph. It was a picture of Mom asleep in the hotel room that night, wrapped in a blanket with her suitcase beside the bed. I had taken it without waking her. She looked peaceful, safe, and I remembered how different I had felt when I took that picture. Back then, I thought my marriage might be over. Now, I wasn't so sure. David walked into the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee. Your mom's coffee, he said, placing one in front of me. No sugar, just a little cream. I smiled. You remembered. I remember a lot more now. He sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, Do you ever think about that night? I knew exactly which night he meant. The airport. He nodded. And the 38 calls. I smiled faintly. I think about them more than you realize. He lowered his eyes. I still hate that I called you that many times. Why? Because now I understand what it looked like. What did it look like? Like I suddenly needed the woman I had just told to figure everything out herself. I didn't correct because that was exactly what happened. He leaned back. I was terrified. I know. I thought if you didn't come home, everything would fall apart. I looked at him. Maybe that's what finally made you understand. He nodded. I had gotten used to you catching everything. I waited. When something broke, you fixed it. When someone needed help, you handled it. When we had a financial problem, you found a solution. When my mother needed something, you showed up. His voice became quieter. And I thought that was just who you were. I said, It is part of who I am. I know. But it doesn't mean people are entitled to it. He nodded. That took me a long time to understand. Our marriage had changed in ways I hadn't expected. Not dramatically. There wasn't some perfect morning when everything became wonderful. Instead, there were small changes. David began checking the budget before making purchases. He stopped hiding bills. We met with the financial counselor every month until the debt was under control. We created an emergency fund. We agreed that major financial decisions required both of us to know what was happening. And when either of our parents needed help, we talked about it together. Not your family, my family, but our family. That distinction mattered. A few months after the airport incident, my mother came to stay with us for a long weekend. When she arrived, David carried her suitcase upstairs. Mom protested, I can carry that. I know, he said. Let me anyway. I watched from the hallway. She smiled, thank you. He nodded. Then he looked at me. I put fresh sheets on the guest bed. I smiled, good. That night, the 3 of us ate dinner together. Nothing fancy. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the kind of meal that wouldn't make anyone post a picture online. But I remember it clearly. Mom told stories from when I was little. David laughed at one about me trying to salute a mailman because I thought every man in uniform was a soldier. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my water. For the first time in a long time, our house felt like home again. Not because we had forgotten what happened, because we hadn't. The memory remained. The lesson remained. And the boundaries remained. Later that night, after Mom went upstairs, David and I stood together in the kitchen. He said, I need to ask you something. What? Do you trust me again? I thought carefully before answering. More than I did. He smiled. That's something. Yes, but not completely. Trust takes time. He nodded. I understand. I reached for his hand. And I trust myself more now. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means I know I can love you without losing myself. He squeezed my hand. I don't want you to lose yourself. I know. That was the difference. Once I had believed a good wife was someone who absorbed every problem, softened every conflict, and made everyone comfortable. Now, I understood something different. A good marriage wasn't built on one person constantly making themselves smaller. It was built on 2 people willing to grow. The next morning, Mom came downstairs. David was already making breakfast. He looked over his shoulder. Morning, Margaret. Morning, pancakes, she smiled. Only if you don't burn them, he laughed. No promises. I stood in the doorway watching them, and suddenly I remembered that phone screen. 38 missed calls. At the time, those calls had felt like proof that my husband finally understood how much he needed me. But now I saw them differently. They weren't the victory. The victory wasn't making him panic. It wasn't making him feel guilty. It wasn't watching him struggle without my help. The real victory was much quieter. It was learning that I could say no. It was learning that boundaries didn't make me selfish. It was learning that protecting my mother didn't make me a bad wife. And it was learning that forgiveness could exist without pretending the hurt never happened. One afternoon, Mom and I sat together on the porch. She looked at me and said, Are you happy? I smiled. Yes, really, really. She nodded. Then I'm happy. I looked toward the kitchen window. David was inside washing dishes. I said, "You know, Mom, I used to think revenge meant making someone regret hurting you." She smiled. And now? Now I think revenge is sometimes becoming so strong and clear-minded that the person who hurt you no longer controls your peace. She nodded slowly. That sounds wiser. I've had a good teacher. She laughed. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. I thought about all the people listening to a story like mine. Maybe some of them had a spouse who dismissed their parents. Maybe someone had been told they were too sensitive. Maybe someone had spent years giving and giving until they couldn't remember what they needed for themselves. If that is you, I want you to remember something. You can love your family without allowing anyone to mistreat you. You can support your spouse without surrendering your boundaries. You can forgive someone without immediately trusting them again. And you can choose reconciliation without pretending nothing happened. Most importantly, never confuse being needed with being respected. A person can depend on you and still fail to appreciate you. Real love is different. Real love doesn't ask you to abandon the people you love. It doesn't make compassion a competition, and it doesn't say, "That's your family, not mine." When someone vulnerable needs help, sometimes the strongest thing you can say is simply, "Okay." Not because you've surrendered, but because you're finally ready to stop arguing with someone who has already shown you who they are. And sometimes after the anger fades, that one quiet word becomes the beginning of a much healthier life. If this story reminded you of something you've experienced, take a moment to reflect on the boundaries that matter in your own life. And if you believe someone else needs to hear this message, share the story with them. You never know whose heart might need the reminder that kindness and self-respect can exist together. And if you enjoy stories about family dignity, second chances, and finding strength when life tests, you consider subscribing and staying with us for the next story. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't hurting someone back, it's finding your peace again. And refusing to lose yourself for anyone. Margaret Sullivan. The moment I said my mother's name, the Admiral's face went pale. He stopped breathing for a second. His hand, still extended from our handshake, slowly dropped to his side. His eyes became glassy, and I watched a decorated 4-star officer look suddenly less like a powerful man, and more like someone who had just been pulled into a painful memory. "Your mother," he whispered. "Yes, sir." His eyes moved to my wrist, then back to my face. "What is your name?" "Ren Sullivan." He took one step backward. I had been assigned to pick him up at the airport, not uncover a secret that had apparently survived for almost 30 years. And yet, standing beneath the fluorescent lights of the terminal, I knew something had changed the instant I saw that tattoo. It was an old-fashioned compass on his wrist, its needle pointing toward the Big Dipper. My mother had the exact same tattoo, same design, same spot. I had seen it countless times while growing up. I remembered tracing the faded ink with my finger when I was a little girl, asking Mom what it meant. She had always smiled sadly and said, "It reminds me that some promises are worth keeping, even when keeping them hurts." She never explained more. Now, the man standing in front of me wore the same symbol. "Sir," I said carefully, "are you all right?" He swallowed. "Does your mother still live in Virginia?" The question hit me harder than his reaction. "How do you know my mother?" He looked away. For several seconds, the noise of the airport seemed to disappear around us. Travelers rolled suitcases across the polished floor while announcements echoed overhead. But I heard only my own heartbeat. "I asked you a question, Admiral." He looked at me. "I knew your mother a long time ago." "How long?" He hesitated. "Before you were born." My stomach tightened. I had spent most of my life believing my father had simply walked away. Mom never spoke badly about him. She only said he had chosen a different life. As a child, I accepted that. As I got older, I stopped asking. But now a 4-star admiral was looking at me as though my existence was something he had never expected to see. I forced myself back into military professionalism. "I was assigned to get you to your hotel, sir." "Yes." His voice sounded distant. He picked up his briefcase, but before we walked away, he looked at me again. "Ren, does your mother know you work with the Navy?" "She does." "Does she know you were assigned to pick me up?" "No." I didn't know who the passenger was until this morning. He nodded slowly. Then he said something that made the hair rise on my arms. Maybe that was for the best. We walked through the airport together. I kept my questions to myself until we reached the parking garage. The moment we got into the government vehicle, I closed the door and looked at him. "Who are you?" to my mother. He stared through the windshield. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. The paper had yellowed. There was one name written across the front: Margaret Sullivan. My breath caught. "Where did you get that?" "I've carried it for 29 years. Why?" "Because I thought I was never going to get the chance to return it. I took the envelope but didn't open it." "What's inside?" "A letter from my mother." He nodded. "Then why didn't you give it to her?" His jaw tightened. "Because I never received it." I stared at him. "That doesn't make sense." It didn't make sense to me either. Not for a very long time. He turned toward me. "Ren, your mother and I loved each other." The words landed with a strange weight. I had never imagined that the man my mother loved could be standing beside me in a Navy parking garage, wearing 4 stars on his shoulders. I looked at the tattoo again, the compass. His fingers covered it instinctively. She gave me the idea. "Why?" "Because we were both young enough to believe we could keep a promise forever." His voice cracked slightly. "What promise?" He looked down at the envelope. "That no matter where the Navy sent us, we'd find our way back to each other." I didn't know what to say. Then I remembered something from my childhood. My mother sitting alone at the kitchen table late one night, holding her wrist beneath the lamp. She had whispered he was supposed to come back. At the time, I thought she meant my father. Now I wasn't so sure. The Admiral seemed to read the realization on my face. "Ren," he said quietly, "what has your mother told you about your father?" "Not much." "What did she say that he left?" His eyes closed. "And you believed her?" "I was a child." He nodded. "I know, there was something in the way he said those words that made me angry. You know." He opened his eyes. "I know because I believed the same thing about her." The silence between us felt enormous. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. For the first time, I wondered whether the story my mother had protected me from was not a story about abandonment at all. Maybe it was a story about betrayal. Maybe someone had lied. And if someone had lied, I needed to know why. The Admiral started the engine, but before he pulled out of the parking space, he looked at me one last time. "Don't call your mother yet." "Why?" "Because if I'm right, she has spent almost 30 years believing something that isn't true." He paused. "And Ren, if she knows that you're standing here with me, she may finally tell you everything." I looked down at the envelope again. My mother's name was written across it, in handwriting I had never seen before. That envelope was about to change everything I believed about my family. I didn't open the envelope that night. I carried it back to my apartment and placed it on the kitchen counter, where I stared at it for nearly an hour. My mother's name was still there in faded ink. Margaret Sullivan. The same woman who had raised me alone. The same woman who had always avoided questions about my father. And now I knew the man standing beside me at the airport believed he had once loved her. I couldn't stop thinking about what the Admiral had said. "Your mother and I loved each other." There was no hesitation in his voice when he said it. No attempt to impress me. No pride, only regret. The next morning I drove to my mother's house. She lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Norfolk in a modest brick ranch she had owned for years. Her front porch had 2 rocking chairs, although she rarely used them. She preferred sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. When I walked through the door, she looked up. "You're early. I need to ask you something." She immediately put down her coffee. "Is something wrong?" I placed the envelope on the table. Her face changed, not dramatically, just enough. Her fingers stopped moving. She stared at her own name. "Where did you get that?" "The Admiral gave it to me." She looked at me. "Which Admiral?" "Thomas Callahan." The color drained from her face. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "You met Thomas at the airport. You were assigned to pick him up." "Yes." She closed her eyes. I had never seen my mother look frightened before. Not when I enlisted, not when I deployed, not even when she had undergone surgery years earlier. But now her hands were trembling. "Mom," I said softly. "Who is Thomas Callahan?" She didn't answer. Who is he to you? Still nothing. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. He showed me his wrist, her eyes lifted. The tattoo, she looked away. An old-fashioned compass, I continued, the needle pointing toward the Big Dipper. My mother's lips began to tremble. He has the same tattoo you have. She pressed her hand over her mouth. I waited. Finally, she whispered, he was supposed to come back. That sentence stopped me cold. I remembered hearing those exact words when I was a little girl. He was supposed to come back. I had always assumed she meant my father. Now I knew better. Was Thomas Callahan my father? She looked at me, and for the first time in my life I saw the answer before she said it. Yes. The room seemed to tilt. I stood up, then sat back down. No, I'm sorry. You told me my father left. I told you what I believed. You knew his name. Yes. You knew where he was. I didn't know where he was for most of your childhood. But you knew he was Thomas. She lowered her eyes. Yes. I felt anger rising in my chest. Not because she had kept a secret. Because I suddenly understood how much of my childhood had been built around that secret. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought he chose not to know you. I stared at her. He said the same thing about you. My mother looked up sharply. What? He thought you left him. Her expression broke. No, he said he believed you abandoned him. She shook her head. I never abandoned Thomas. Then what happened? She stood and walked to a cabinet near the dining room. For a moment, she simply rested her hand on the handle. Then she opened it. Behind a stack of old cookbooks was a small wooden box. She carried it to the table. Inside were photographs, letters, military papers, and a folded piece of fabric. She picked up one photograph. It showed a younger version of my mother standing beside a man in a Navy uniform, Thomas Callahan. They were both smiling, not the polite smile people use for photographs. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. My mother turned the photograph over. On the back in faded handwriting were 4 words. Find your way home. She handed it to me. We made those tattoos after Thomas received orders overseas. She said, you both got them? Yes. Why the Big Dipper? She smiled sadly. He said sailors needed stars. I almost laughed, but I couldn't, she continued. The compass meant direction. The stars meant home. We promised that no matter what happened, we would find our way back. What happened? Her expression hardened. Someone lied to both of us, who she looked toward the window. Captain Richard Hayes. The name meant nothing to me, but my mother clearly remembered it. He served with Thomas. She said he was ambitious, very ambitious. What did he do? He told me Thomas had moved on, that he had decided our relationship was a mistake. Then he told Thomas that I wanted nothing more to do with him. That was a lie. Yes. My mother opened another drawer and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. I wrote Thomas dozens of times. I looked at the envelopes. Some had been returned. Others had never been opened. You never sent them. I sent everyone. My throat tightened. Then why didn't he get them? I don't know. I looked at the letters again. Mom, what about me? She sat down. I found out I was pregnant after Thomas was deployed, and you told him I tried. Did he know? I don't think so. Her voice broke. I waited for a response that never came. I understood then. The anger I had carried toward my father for years had been built on a story neither of us had written. My mother reached for my hand. Ren, I never wanted you to grow up hating him. I did hate him. I know. I thought he didn't want me. She squeezed my fingers. He never knew. I looked down at the letters. One envelope was dated 3 months before I was born. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. I opened it carefully. The first line read, Thomas, if you are reading this, then someone finally let my letter reach you. I stopped breathing because underneath that sentence was another line, and it was written in a different hand, returned, do not forward. I knew then that the lie hadn't simply separated 2 people. It had taken a father from his daughter before either of us ever had the chance to meet. I read the letter 3 times before I could make sense of what I was seeing. My mother had written to Thomas from the hospital where she worked. She had told him about the pregnancy, about the baby she was carrying, and about how desperately she wanted him to come home. But beneath her words was that handwritten instruction returned, do not forward. I looked at my mother. Who wrote this? I don't know. You must have some idea. She shook her head. I knew something was wrong, Ren. I just didn't know how wrong. I gathered the letters and took them home with me. That night, I called Admiral Callahan. He answered, on the second ring. Ren, I found the letters. There was silence. All of them. Not all. Enough. He exhaled slowly. Your mother told you. She told me you were my father. Enough.
Silence.
Then I heard his voice change. Ren, I need you to tell me your side. I will. Everything, I promise. The following afternoon, we met at a small diner outside Norfolk. It wasn't the kind of place where anyone expected to see a four-star admiral. That was exactly why Callahan chose it. He arrived civilian clothes. A navy blue jacket, white shirt, no medals, no rank insignia. For the first time, he looked less like an admiral and more like an older man who had spent years carrying something heavy. He sat across from me. I loved your mother, he said. I know. She was the strongest woman I had ever met. Then why didn't you go looking for her? His eyes lowered. Because I believed she didn't want me because of Richard Hayes. He nodded. Hayes was my superior for a time. He was smart, well-connected, and very good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe. What exactly did he tell you? Callahan looked toward the window. He told me Margaret had written to him. He said she wanted to end our relationship. Did you see the letter? No. Then why believe him? Because he showed me a copy. My anger rose. What did it say? That Margaret had met someone else? That she wanted a normal life? That she didn't want a Navy officer coming back into her life? That wasn't her. I know that now. You should have known then. He didn't defend himself. You're right. That answer surprised me, he continued. I was young, I was angry, and I was being deployed again. Hayes told me she had already made her choice. So, you walked away? Yes, and never checked. His eyes filled. I wrote her once one letter. What happened? I was told it was returned. My heart sank. Who told you? Hayes. There it was again. The same man standing between them. The same name appearing on both sides of the story. I pulled out a copy of my mother's letter. This one was returned, too. Callahan stared at the handwriting. I've never seen that letter. You should have. Yes. He looked down. I should have gone to her house. I should have called. I should have asked questions. I should have done 100 things differently. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Maybe I never would be. But at least he wasn't pretending he had done everything right. What did Hayes want? Callahan hesitated. He knew I was reviewing several procurement contracts. Military contracts? Yes. Were they connected to him indirectly? He explained that several years earlier he had discovered irregularities involving a defense contractor and officers who had financial connections to the company. Hayes had been involved in the review process. Callahan suspected Hayes was protecting someone. But why destroy your relationship with my mother because I was getting too close? So he hired her to protect his career. That is what I believe. I stared at him. That doesn't explain why he kept lying for decades. Callahan leaned back. Because once someone builds a lie, they have to keep feeding it. That sentence stayed with me. The next morning, I started digging. I wasn't investigating as a vigilante. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I was a Navy servicewoman, and I knew the difference between suspicion and evidence. I began with public records, old newspaper archives, military biographies, and documents my mother had saved. Then I found something. A newspaper article from 1998. It mentioned a procurement investigation that had quietly ended after a senior officer transferred to another command. The officer's name was Richard Hayes. I kept reading. There was a photograph beside the article. Hayes stood beside Thomas Callahan at an official Navy ceremony. The caption described them as trusted colleagues. I almost laughed. Trusted colleagues. I printed the article. Then I found something else. A handwritten note inside one of my mother's old envelopes. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother had written, Richard said Thomas would lose career if I kept contacting him. I stared at that sentence. Then another note beneath it. He said Thomas had already chosen someone else. My hands began to shake. Hayes hadn't simply lied once. He had controlled the story from both sides. He had made my mother believe Thomas didn't want her. He had made Thomas believe my mother didn't want him. And, while they both lived with the consequences, he continued building his career. I called. I found something. What? Your former colleague wasn't just involved in the letters. What did you find? Mom wrote that he threatened your career. There was silence. Then Callahan said quietly, I remember that conversation. My heart stopped. What conversation? Hayes warned me that if Margaret kept contacting me, my career could become complicated. You remember? I remember. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't certain. I closed my eyes. Admiral, we need to find out what really happened. Yes. And if Hayes did this deliberately, Callahan interrupted gently. Wren, what are you planning? I looked at the old photograph on my desk. I don't want revenge. I paused. I want the truth. And for the first time, I understood that those two things were not the same. I spent the next several days reminding myself of one thing. I was not going to become obsessed with revenge. That would have been easy. After discovering that one man might have stolen decades from my mother, my father, and me, part of me wanted to see Richard Hayes lose everything. His reputation, his friends, his comfortable retirement, every bit of respect he had earned, while my mother lived with the consequences of his lies. But anger is dangerous when you let it make decisions for you. I had learned that in the Navy. You don't act because you're angry. You gather facts. You document what happened. Then you let the truth speak for itself. So I kept digging. Admiral Callahan helped where he could, but he was careful. He didn't want to use his rank to pressure anyone. If this was going to be resolved, it had to be based on evidence. Then we found someone who could help. Richard Hayes had been married for decades. His wife was named Evelyn. According to public records, they still lived in the same Virginia town where they had raised their children. I wasn't sure what she knew. I wasn't even sure she would speak to us. But when Callahan called her, she agreed to meet. Not at her house, not at a restaurant. She asked us to meet at a small church fellowship hall on a Tuesday afternoon. When Evelyn walked in, she looked like a woman who had spent years carrying a secret she didn't want anymore. She was in her late 60s with silver hair and tired eyes. She looked at Callahan, then at me. You're Margaret's daughter. Yes. She nodded slowly. I thought you might come one day. My heart tightened. You knew about me. I knew there was a child. Did you know I was his daughter? She looked at Callahan. I suspected. Callahan remained silent. I placed copies of the letters on the table. I need to know what Richard did. Evelyn sat down. For several moments she simply stared at the papers. Then she said Richard was afraid of Thomas. Why? Because Thomas was getting close to something. Richard didn't want anyone to find the contracts. She nodded. I don't know all the details. Richard never told me everything, but I knew there was an investigation. Did he interfere with my mother's letters? Evelyn looked down. Yes. My chest tightened. How do you know? Because I saw him do it. Callahan leaned forward. What did you see? Evelyn took a slow breath. He had a stack of envelopes. Some were addressed to Thomas. Some were to Margaret. I felt my hands go cold. What did he do with them? He opened them. Why? He said he was protecting Thomas. I almost laughed. Protecting him? That was the word he used. Evelyn looked at me. He said Margaret was emotional and that Thomas needed to focus on his career. I shook my head. That wasn't his decision to make. No. Did you ever confront him? Not then. Why? She looked away. Because I was afraid too. That answer stayed with me. Fear had been everywhere in this story. My mother had been afraid of destroying Thomas's career. Thomas had been afraid of being unwanted. Evelyn had been afraid of her husband. And Richard Hayes had been afraid of losing his career. One man's fear had multiplied until it became an entire family's tragedy. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a small key. There is something I kept. She placed it on the table. What is it? A box. She looked at Callahan. Richard doesn't know I have it. The box was in her car. Inside were copies of old correspondence notes and one letter Richard had written. I unfolded it carefully. The letter wasn't addressed to my mother. It was addressed to another Navy officer. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard had written that Callahan needed to be kept away from personal distractions while the procurement investigation was underway. Then came a sentence that made my stomach turn. Margaret Sullivan must not be allowed to contact him directly. I looked at Callahan. His face had gone completely still. You were right, I whispered. He didn't answer. Evelyn began to cry. I should have stopped him. I looked at her. You can't change what happened. I know, but you can tell the truth now. She nodded. I want to. That was when I realized something. The truth wasn't going to come from revenge. It was going to come from people finally becoming brave enough to say what they had seen. Later that evening, Callahan and I sat in his car outside the fellowship hall. He held the copy of Richard's letter. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Do what?" "Keep digging." I turned toward him. "My mother waited almost 30 years, I know. I spent most of my life thinking my father didn't want me." He looked down. "I know. And now you're telling me I can just walk away?" "No." He paused. "I'm telling you that you don't have to carry this alone." For some reason, those words affected me more than anything else he had said. I had spent my entire life thinking I had to be strong, because there was no one else. Now, this man, the father I had never known, was offering to stand beside me. Not as an admiral, not as a stranger, as my father. But I wasn't ready to call him that, not yet. "We still need to talk to Hayes," I said. Callahan nodded. "I'll go with you." "No," he looked surprised. "I need to do this myself." "Ren? I don't want him hiding behind your rank." Callahan understood. The next afternoon I drove to Richard Hayes's house. He opened the door himself. He was older than I expected, white hair, thin frame, a cane in one hand. For a moment, and I felt something unexpected, not hatred, sadness, because this was the man who had changed 3 lives with a handful of lies. He looked at me. "You're Ren?" "Yes," his face changed. "Does Thomas know you're here?" "He does now." Hayes lowered his eyes. I placed the copies of the letters on the table between us. "You told my mother he abandoned her." Silence. "You told him she abandoned him." "Nothing. You intercepted their letters." His hand tightened around the cane. Finally, he whispered. "I was afraid." I stared at him. "Of what?" "Losing everything." I took a breath. "You didn't just risk losing your career." I pointed to the letters. "You stole a family." Hayes looked at the papers, and for the first time, the man who had controlled everyone else's story had nothing left to say. Richard Hayes kept staring at the letters on his dining room table. For almost a minute, he said nothing. I stood across from him waiting. Finally, he lowered himself into a chair. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. I felt something inside me tighten. "Almost 30 years is a long way to go." He nodded. "I know." "Then tell me exactly what happened." He rubbed his hands together. "I was afraid Thomas was going to expose the procurement problems. There were people above me involved. If he kept digging, my career was finished. And my mother, she became leverage." The word made my stomach turn. "You used her?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I knew he loved her." Hayes looked down. I thought if I convinced him she had rejected him, he would stop looking backward and focus on his career. "And you told my mother the same thing about him?" "Yes." "Did you know she was pregnant?" His face changed. "No, I studied him." "You didn't know?" "No." For some reason, that answer hurt more than I expected. Because it meant the tragedy had been even more ordinary than I imagined. There hadn't been some elaborate plan to steal a child. There had been fear, selfishness, lies, and people making decisions they had no right to make. What happened to the letters? "I intercepted some most, and the rest destroyed." My jaw tightened. "You destroyed letters between 2 people who loved each other?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at me. "Because by then I was trying to protect the lie." There it was. The sentence I had been waiting for. Once a lie becomes your shield, you start defending it even after you forget why you built it. I stood. "I don't want your excuses." "I know. I want the truth documented." He nodded. "I'll give you everything I have." "You'll also tell my mother," his eyes filled with regret. "I will." I left his house without shaking his hand. I wasn't ready for that. "Outside," I called. He confessed. There was a long silence. "Are you all right?" No, he didn't try to make me feel better. That mattered. "I'll meet you at your mother's." When I arrived, Callahan was already there. He stood on my mother's porch, looking strangely nervous. For the first time, I realized that this decorated admiral, this man who had commanded thousands of sailors, was terrified of one woman. My mother opened the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither moved. Then my mother said quietly, "Thomas!" He swallowed. "Margaret," I stepped aside. "I'll be inside." My mother reached for my arm. "No, stay." So I stayed. Callahan looked at her. "I thought you left me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought you didn't want me. I never stopped loving you." She looked down. I waited. "I know." "No, Thomas. You don't know." Her voice trembled. "I waited every night. I thought maybe there would be a phone call, a letter, anything. I wrote. I never received them. I know that now." She looked at him. "Why didn't you come?" He took a breath. "Because I believed you didn't want me." My mother's face crumpled. I was 26. So was I. We were young. Yes. And scared. Yes, she laughed through her tears. We let other people decide our lives. Callahan nodded. I should have fought harder. You should have. He didn't argue. I should have come looking for you. Yes, I should have found you. Yes, and I should have known there was a child. My mother looked at me. You didn't know. I would have come. I believe you. That was the first moment I saw something change between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something smaller. The possibility of forgiveness. Ren. I'm sorry. I crossed my arms. You didn't know I existed. No, but once you knew I wanted to find you. You could have. Yes. I expected anger. Instead, I felt tears in my eyes. I spent years thinking there was something wrong with me. His face broke. There was never anything wrong with you. I thought my father didn't want me. He shook his head. I would have wanted every minute. I looked away. For years, I had imagined meeting my father. I had imagined anger, accusations, maybe even walking away. I had never imagined standing in my mother's kitchen, with tears running down my face while a four-star admiral apologized for a childhood he hadn't known he had taken from me. He didn't ask me to call him Dad. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said, "If you ever want to know me, I'll be here." That was enough. Over the next few weeks, the evidence was formally documented and turned over to the appropriate authorities and Navy channels for review. Richard Hayes could no longer hide behind his retirement or his reputation. But something surprised me. Seeing consequences finally reach him didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. My mother and Callahan began talking again slowly, carefully. They didn't pretend 30 years had disappeared. They didn't suddenly become young again. They simply started having coffee together. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they sat in silence. One evening, I noticed them sitting on the porch. My mother reached for Callahan's hand, his sleeve pulled back slightly. I saw the tattoo, the old compass, the needle pointing toward the Big Dipper. My mother noticed it too. She smiled. I never changed mine. Callahan rolled back his own sleeve. Neither did I. I looked at their wrists. Two identical tattoos. Two people who had spent decades believing they had lost each other. And suddenly I understood something. The tattoo had never been a promise that life would be easy. It was a reminder that people can lose their way. What matters is whether they have the courage to find their way back. I had spent weeks thinking about revenge. But standing there, watching my mother and the father I had just discovered, I realized something I hadn't expected. The best ending wasn't watching Richard Hayes suffer. It was watching his lies finally lose their power. He had taken years from us, but he couldn't take the years we still had left. I looked at Callahan. He smiled. Dinner next Sunday. Sunday. I hesitated, then I smiled back. Okay. It was only one word. But for me, it was the beginning of something I had never thought I'd have. A father. For a long time, I thought justice would feel different. I thought there would be a moment when Richard Hayes finally faced what he had done, and I would feel some great weight lift from my chest. But when the truth was documented and his actions were finally brought into the proper channels for review, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day at work. The kind that settles into your bones after carrying the same unanswered question for most of your life. Why didn't my father want me? Why did my mother wait? Why did two people who loved each other spend decades believing they had been rejected? And why had I needed to discover a tattoo at an airport to finally learn the truth? There were no easy answers. Richard Hayes eventually faced the consequences of what he had done. His reputation could no longer protect him from the facts. People who had once trusted him had to confront what he had hidden. But I never celebrated it. That surprised me. For weeks, I had imagined standing over him and finally saying, "You deserve this." Instead, when I heard that his actions were being formally reviewed, I simply closed my eyes. I thought about my mother. I thought about the little girl I had been. And I thought about the man I had spent years believing didn't want me. That was when I realized something important. Justice wasn't about making Hayes feel the pain he had caused. Justice was about making sure the truth could no longer be buried. A few months passed. My mother's relationship with Thomas changed slowly. They didn't pretend they could erase 30 years. They couldn't. There were birthdays missed, holidays spent apart, family photographs that would never exist, childhood memories Thomas could never recover. There were things I couldn't tell him because I didn't remember them. There were stories my mother had stopped telling because they hurt too much. But they began building something new. Not the life they had lost, a different life. One afternoon, I found the two of them sitting on my mother's porch. Thomas was holding 2 cups of coffee. My mother was reading the newspaper. "You're early," she said when she saw me. "I came to check on you." Thomas smiled. "You always check on people. Occupational hazard." He laughed. I sat beside them. For a while, none of us spoke. Then Thomas asked, "Do you remember the first time you saw the tattoo at the airport?" "Yes. I remember thinking you looked like you had seen a ghost." He smiled faintly. I thought I had. I looked at his wrist. "Do you ever regret getting it?" He shook his head. "Never. Even after everything, especially after everything." My mother reached for his hand. I watched their fingers slowly intertwine. The compass tattoo was visible beneath his sleeve. The needle pointed toward the Big Dipper. My mother noticed me looking at it. "You know what it means now?" I nodded. "Finding your way home." She smiled. "That's what we called it." Thomas looked at her, and I meant it. I looked down at my own hands. For most of my life, I had thought family was something you were either given or denied. I had believed mine was broken before I was old enough to understand what broken meant. But now I understood something different. Families can be damaged. People can make terrible mistakes. Years can disappear. And still sometimes people can choose what to do with the time they have left. One Sunday, Thomas invited me to his home for dinner. I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to go, because I was nervous. I had spent my entire adult life being independent. Now, I was learning how to be someone's daughter. That was harder than I expected. We sat around his dining room table. He had cooked too much food. I laughed when I saw it. "Did you make enough for the entire squadron?" He smiled. "Your mother told me you like leftovers." "She did. She's been giving me instructions." I laughed. It felt strangely normal. After dinner, Thomas brought out an old photograph. It was the same photograph my mother had shown me. He was young. She was young. Both of them smiling. On the back were the words, "Find your way home." He handed it to me. "I want you to have this." I looked at him. "Are you sure?" "Yes." I turned the photograph over again. There was something peaceful about holding it now. The picture no longer represented a life that had been stolen from me. It represented a truth that had finally found its way back. I put the photograph in my wallet. "Thank you." He nodded. Then he said something I will never forget. "I can't give you back the years I missed." I looked at him, "But I can make sure I don't miss the ones ahead." That was when I finally allowed myself to say the word, "Dad." His eyes filled with tears. He looked down for a moment, trying to compose himself. Then he smiled. "Yeah, nothing." He laughed softly, and somehow that was enough. My mother and Thomas never tried to recreate their youth. They simply chose to stop letting the past decide the future. As for me, I carried one lesson forward. I used to think revenge meant making someone feel the pain they had caused. I was wrong. Sometimes the strongest form of justice is refusing to let another person's lie determine who you become. The truth doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it comes after years of silence. Sometimes it arrives in a faded letter. Sometimes it appears on the wrist of a stranger at an airport. But when it finally comes, you have a choice. You can use it to destroy, or you can use it to heal. I chose healing. My mother chose forgiveness without forgetting. Thomas chose to make up for lost time. And even though none of us could change what happened, we could decide what happened next. That old compass tattoo taught me something I will carry for the rest of my life. A compass doesn't promise that you will never get lost. It simply reminds you that you can always choose a direction. And sometimes after years of wandering the direction you need, most is home. If this story touched something in your own life, take a moment to think about the people you may have misunderstood, the words you may have left unsaid, or the relationships that might still be worth repairing. And if you believe that truth, forgiveness, and second chances still matter, share this story with someone who may need that reminder. To Stuber for more stories about courage, family justice, and the unexpected ways life gives us a second chance. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge. Sometimes it's finding your way.